can start whenever you see the live stream link pop up on the screen.
It's there. So I would like to call the meeting of the Oxford Planning Commission to order and would ask Sam if you would call the roll, please.
Will do. Mr. Keebler?
Dick? Keebler? You're muted.
Here.
Affirmative. Ms. Rosenberg?
Here.
Mr. Dana?
Here.
Ms. Blackmore?
Here.
Mr. Bracken?
Here.
And Mr. Watt is not here. Mr. Snavely?
I'm here. Okay, next item is approval of the agenda. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I so introduce.
Okay, is there a second? It's been moved and seconded by Carla to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. Okay, seeing all hands raised, the agenda is approved. Next item is approval of the minutes of August 11th. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve.
It's moved by Shauna Rosenberg and seconded by Steve Dane. Okay. All those in favor, are there any corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes as distributed, raise your hand, please. Okay, everybody raised their hand. So let the record show that the minutes are approved. Next item are public comments related to items not on the agenda. So if you are a member of the public who is watching this, if you would indicate, if you're on, have the ability to see a hand raising feature at the bottom of your screen, you can do that and Sam will let us know. Otherwise, if you're on a telephone, I think it's *9 that will indicate that you would like to contribute. Do we have anyone, Sam?
Mr. Chair, there are none at this time.
Okay. In that case, we will move to reports from commissions, boards, committee, and staff. Yes, go ahead with staff, Sam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one report. Today was the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments ICC meeting. It's a long acronym. It's the Intermodal Coordinating Committee. And following that meeting was the prioritization subcommittee. So those of you that have served in some capacity on OKI or are currently are familiar with what the entity does as far as the funding for transportation projects in our region. There is some potentially unfortunate news, not for our project that we applied for. It looks like it probably will not be funded for the East-West Connector. There was a lot of competition for projects, and we had requested several million dollars, about $5 million, actually $4 million on the trail project. And our local match was beyond the minimum, but there were other applicants who had more of a local match percentage than we did, and we didn't score as highly in some of the categories. So it hasn't been voted on yet at the full ICC board next month, but it probably will not be funded. So we'll regroup with the grant writing team, and I'm sure Jessica will have another strategy. So I'll give you that update.
Okay.
And that's all I have.
Thank you. Zach, anything? Okay, any members of the commission would like to report on board or commission that you are associated with? Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I just wanted to report on the Environmental Commission. Well, actually, the biggest thing of note is that long-serving member Wright Wynn is retiring and leaving us. Won't be on the commission. And I think we'll thank him for his efforts at hopefully the next council meeting. But I wanted to say thank you to him at this opportunity. And other things that we're dealing with, greenhouse gas inventory we're moving forward with, and our connections with IES. and helping to collect data going forward. And we're also looking more into solar and renewable energy options, and also dealing with the landfill and methane and carbon emissions.
Okay, sounds like a very active agenda.
Definitely.
Anyone else have a report? Go ahead, Shauna.
Not terribly much to report, just HAC, Housing Advisory Commission. We looked in depth at funding sources for the Housing Trust Fund based on our conversation with City Council in a work session. And then I got the pleasure to meet everyone in the CIC. So I went to my first meeting last week and it was really cool. I learned a lot of stuff. For the public watching now, though, I just want to say that the city has a gift card program where you can buy gift cards for businesses in the area. The city bought $200,000 worth of gift cards from local businesses, and you can go to the website and buy them to help pay back the city for the help that they gave businesses. So we talked a lot about that. And then we also talked about the city doing basically economic research with a business fraternity. Basically, Dave Prithurch even stated like it might be good as part of the upcoming research for a comprehensive plan. So that was pretty cool. Sent that on to council. That's it.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Not seeing any. I will move us on to new business. And we have PC 2020-09, conditional use at 305 North Main Street to allow for an accessory dwelling unit in an R3 MS zoning district. Scott Webb, applicant, is the agent. I would entertain a motion to move into public hearing.
I so move.
Is there a second? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. At this point, I want to make it clear that I will be recusing myself from all discussion on this item, since I am asking Scott to do some design work for myself and for our family. So I will just facilitate the meeting, but I will not be commenting on any of the items. So we will move it to, and by the way, I would normally go to our vice chair, but he's not here tonight either. So I'm just facilitating this portion. And so we'll turn it over to staff. Oh, did we take a vote? Yeah, we did take a vote. We'll take staff to make their report, please. Sam or Zach, whoever's, yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Get the presentation going. Okay, can everybody see the cover slide for the conditional use?
Yes.
Great. All right, so our only case of the night, the conditional use, this is at 305 North Main Street for an accessory dwelling unit. And there we go. Some quick details for you. The applicant is Scott Webb Architect. The property owner is Red Hawk Rental Properties, LLC. And the lot area that we're dealing with for this particular request is a little over 10,000 square feet. The current use, it's an existing single family dwelling with a detached building in the back of the lot, which resembles a garage from the exterior. And the zoning district in question is the R3MS single, 2, and 3 family mile square residential. And the proposal is to convert the structure that appears as a garage to essentially legalize it as an accessory dwelling unit. That's the reverse order. There we go. So here's a location map showing you an aerial image. Right here is the main structure, and then this is the structure that is the subject of the application, which is in the southeastern corner of the lot. You can see there's a number of other residential properties that border there to the south. This is, of course, on North Main Street, which is also State Route 732. And then here is East Vine and West Vine just to the south. And then here's a look at the zoning classifications within the area. So you can see the R3MS district is in orange and the R1MS district is shown in yellow off to the west. And here's a bird's eye view of the property looking north. So you can see that the garage structure is pretty much tucked behind this other existing residential structure here on East Vine Street. And then this is highlighting the main structure. And then looking to the south, you get kind of a better view. So the main structure is kind of like a stucco design. It's a 2-story. It's got a portion in the back that's actually 1-story. And then the accessory structure itself that's existing is a concrete block structure. It's white. It's got 2 garage doors that face out toward North Main. And it is fairly close to this other existing residential structure, which there's actually a retaining wall back here. You can see a little bit of it right here. And the site plan that's been submitted notes that that is about 5 feet away. This structure that is about 5 feet away from that retaining wall. And then looking to the east, so this gets you a better view of the existing driveway that runs all the way back to the garage doors. And then there's a little pull-out area here for additional parking. So the property that is the subject of this application was part of a rezoning action in 2017, an upzoning. It was a 20-acre area, which is highlighted in red here, that was rezoned, upzoned from R1MS to R3MS. And really the object of that was to increase areas close to campus, increasing the density in those areas. So allowing for, an increase in intensity on individual lots to go from, say, in this particular case, we have an existing single family. So they would be permitted by right to establish either a 2-family or a 3-family dwelling on this lot if they so chose to do so. And then looking to the site photos, which were submitted by the applicant. So this gets you a better view of the main house here that's viewed from North Main. And the gross living area for that structure, according to the auditor, is a little under 2,000 square feet. And the footprint is 1,500 square feet. And then this gets you a good view of the garage that we're talking about for the accessory dwelling unit. And that totals a little over 1,200 square feet. There's a provision that's written into the R3MS district for accessory dwelling units that limits the amount of square footage that they can consume. And it basically limits it to either 1,000 square feet or 50% of the main house footprint, whichever is smaller. So in this case, the footprint is actually smaller than 1,000 square feet because you take 1,500, you divide it by 2, so that's 750. So this request is, in essence, exceeding the normal limit. However, the code does have additional language written in there that if Planning Commission and Council find it acceptable to have an increase in size, then they can approve it as is. So it's in essence kind of already suggesting that you could grant a waiver to the standard inside of the standard itself. And if you refer to your packet in Exhibit A, there's language in there from Chapter 1143 that specifically calls out that you can modify the standard. But just wanted to make sure that was clear to everyone before we move forward. So here is the submitted site plan. And with the site plan, it's really just recognizing how the lot is already presently developed. So it's showing you the existing driveway. There's enough space for parking 5 vehicles, 3 here in this little offset area, and then 2 that would be immediately adjacent to the garage structure. And the reason I said at the beginning that it appears as a garage is it does, in fact, it's actually configured already to be utilized as a dwelling unit. So if we skip ahead to the floor plan, this in essence is showing you the existing floor plan of the structure. I did look into some of the prior history on this site once it was revealed to me by the applicant that this was already configured and developed to be utilized as a dwelling unit. So I looked back into the city records for this, and it turns out there was a permit filed in 2001. The description for that permit was to renovate the garage structure. With a permit that's that old, it essentially exceeds the retention schedule that we have for keeping old plans on file. The limit that we have in place per our schedule is 5 years. So a permit from the early 2000s, we don't retain plans that old. The only thing that we really retain would be if there was a site plan component to that permit, we would hang on to that, or if there was a CO. In this case, we didn't find a site plan, but we did find a CO for this garage renovation that took place in 2001. And that CO specified that this structure was not to be used as a dwelling unit. So really, this structure has never been legally recognized as a dwelling. So essentially, the nature of this request is to legalize the use through the conditional use process and through the provisions that were put in place for accessory dwelling units. So just want to make sure that was clear to everyone as well. But if you look at the floor plan that shows you the existing layout, you can see that there are 2 bedrooms, there's a bathroom, and then kind of an open area where there's a kitchen and a living room. And even though the appearance from the outside is that there are 2 garage doors here, you could not park a car in here because it's being utilized as a living room. So again, just want to make sure that was clear to everyone. So there are some specific ADU standards, and these were actually written into the code in 2017, the same year that the upzoning took place, and really, again, for a very similar purpose, and allowing for properties within certain areas closer to campus to densify. And really, the purpose behind the ADU provisions was to help preserve some of the existing housing stock. So in this case, by having an accessory dwelling unit on this lot, it prevents you from having to demolish the existing historic home that is in the front of the lot. But just going through these standards one by one, I just thought it would be helpful to go through them just to make sure everybody was clear on where this particular application stood on these. So there's A through G that appear in 1143. So this is in the R3MS district section. For ADUs, it specifies that it can be in a standalone structure or it can be located above a garage. So in this case, it is a standalone structure. So it meets that standard. For standard B, that says that you can have no more than 3 dwelling units on a lot, inclusive of any ADUs. So if this ADU were granted, then actually they could have a 2-family dwelling also on the same lot, and it would still be compliant from a use standpoint with the zoning code. And then letter C, it's only allowed on lots 5,000 square feet or larger. So this is roughly double that. So that meets the standard. Standard D is the one that I already mentioned to you, which is the limit on the size. So it says that you take the smaller of the 2. In this case, we take the 50% of the footprint because that's the smallest figure, unless approved by Planning Commission and Council. You could recognize that in the form of a condition, or maybe the meeting minutes could simply reflect that if you decided that that was permissible to accept that standard and accept that there's a larger footprint than what was written into the code as sort of a base standard. And then letter E, it shall be located in the rear yard. So this is somewhat in conflict with a couple of the comments that the fire chief gave us, that he is, well, maybe I won't necessarily speak for him, but essentially, if I had to summarize a part of his comments, it was that he was not in favor of having dwelling units so far back at the back of a lot. And this is something that no applicant could really get around, and that's precisely how these codes were put into place. So that's not really something that we see that can be, you know, sort of mitigated or you know, done in some other manner that's contrary to the code, because it's already been, you know, it's already gone through that legislative action. It's already been adopted as a standard for letter E. And then letter F shall be designed to be smaller in mass, height, and square footage than the principal dwelling. It is still, even though it exceeds the square footage of D, it is still smaller in height and mass than the principal dwelling. And then letter G, so the standards were really written in mind for a brand new structure to be built and designed that is closer in character and architectural style to the main structure. The language doesn't really anticipate the conversion of existing structures that may be present. So letter G, there's not really much adherence to letter G with this proposal because we're dealing with an existing structure that more or less really doesn't match the character of the main house in a way that if this were a brand new structure, it would be required to have some resemblance to the main structure. So I'll conclude with the staff recommendations. So at this time, we actually recommend tabling the application. We feel that additional information is needed to get this to a state where staff would feel comfortable recommending approval. And we specified that this could give us some time where the applicant could reach a better agreement with the fire chief on a more suitable structure design that has a more obvious appearance as a dwelling unit for emergency and safety purposes. Because the way it looks right now, it looks very much like a garage. And you know, if the structure was on fire and the emergency crews showed up, they may not go in and try and save anyone because they may just think it's just for storage and it's a garage only. So it needs to have an appearance as a dwelling. And in turn, through this additional conversation with staff, we hope that the applicant could bring some additional plans and details demonstrating how the structure can be made to appear more like a dwelling than a garage. I do have the applicant's presentation that I just received today. I know he's got a couple examples of how that could be done. So I'll let him kind of explain those for you. And that really concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Okay, let me pull up everybody's pictures so I can see everyone.
Okay.
Give me a second. There we go. So is there anyone who has questions for staff before we go to the, yes, Ms. Rosenberg, it's up to you.
Thank you. Zach, so I have a question about the history of this detached garage dwelling unit. So I understand that it was not legal prior to this meeting. But has anybody been inside of it, city staff? Has anybody looked at how it relates to city code as far as, building standards for a dwelling unit? I mean, to me, this sounds like a garage that maybe had some walls put up and the electric isn't good. I don't know. I don't know what to trust with somebody that left it going this long as a dwelling unit, not legally. So I just went on a soapbox, but has this been looked at all? Like, has any city staff checked this building out?
Zach?
At this point, the only thing that I could probably most solidly say is that when a CO is issued, there is an inspection by the building official that goes in there. And the CO that was issued for the 2001 permit was actually dated 2003. So there would have had to have been somebody in there at that time examining the structure for those types of things. But since then, I can't really comment on that as far as knowing, what city officials, when and where it might have taken place. I myself haven't been inside the structure. I know that the applicant has in drawing up the floor plan. And one of the things that we would recommend if this did end up as an approved conditional use, is that we would want to see a building and zoning permit submitted so that we can actually officially recognize the change of use. And then that way it comes under the eyes of all of the relevant city officials and departments and triggers any necessary inspections that there may be to, officially recognize the change of use to residential.
Okay, again, these are questions for staff. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Keebler.
Does the current structure meet all the setback requirements for the lot?
That's a good
Like it's
question.
5 feet on one side and 7 feet in the rear. Does that meet current requirements?
The current side yard requirement would be 5 feet. So if we look to the site plan,
It does.
showing a 5-foot distance.
What about the rear lot?
So the site plan seems to indicate that it would meet the setback requirement.
What about the rear lot requirement?
The rear yard looks like
7 feet.
would
Does that meet
not
requirement?
meet the rear yard requirement, which is 35 feet.
So
So
it does not meet the rear yard requirement.
that's correct.
Thank you. Okay, are there other questions for staff before we hear from Mr. Webb? Seeing none, we will move to Mr. Webb, and you can lead us through.
All right, well, thank you for your Zoom participation this evening. And if Zach or whomever's in charge there can start my presentation. So obviously, I'm not the designer here. I'm not the architect of the original building. I have become acquainted with the owners recently through some other properties that they have. This one in particular, maybe I can kind of start with some sort of general comments about some of the things that were sort of left open. So to answer Shauna's question, as Zach pointed out, I mean, this was a plan that was submitted. It was inspected, presumably through every inspection that would be required through construction, from rough framing, rough electric, rough plumbing, all through final inspections, and finally a certificate of occupancy was granted. So this is not something that was done under the radar or, you know, was submitted as renovating a garage, like you're just gonna put drywall in it and then in the end you build a whole apartment in there. That's simply not what happened. That being said, I wasn't involved, and I don't believe that anyone here has any personal recollection of this, and record keeping requirements being what they are seems to have left a bit of a gap in the record. My clients, the Dake family, relayed to me that they were told that they could use this for their personal use, that when they come to town, that they could personally stay there. My clients are from St. Louis. They own about 17 or 18 properties in town, I believe, at this point. They come to town often to do maintenance and things like that. So they were allowed to live there. And I believe that their son lived there part-time when he was a student at Miami. So that being said, it's been in this condition for, you know, going on 17 or 18 years now, based on when the certificate of occupancy was granted. And it has never been rented. I mean, it's just simply been there. I have been inside. It's a half dwelling unit, half shop. There's pressure washers sitting in there, some kind of random maintenance equipment and things like that. No one lives there now or has lived there since their son has graduated, as far as I understand it. So anyways, I just kind of wanted to start there, that, you know, this is not something that is illegal or was not approved. It was legal, it was inspected, it was approved. It was just left in sort of an odd limbo, so to speak, of it's a dwelling unit that was inspected and granted a certificate of occupancy, but can't be used as a dwelling unit in terms, I guess, of renting it, but apparently was approved to be able to use for the owner's personal use. So that's kind of got us to where we are here today. We can go to the next slide. So Zach did a nice job of kind of showing how these kind of relate. I've just sort of recreated these both from the auditor's website and also from the engineer's website, where we have some property dimensions. I personally field measured the building itself, and since there were no drawings available, we created the drawing of the floor plan itself. I kind of have on this slide the same sort of checklist that Zach had gone through, that we do meet the general requirements of 11. Sorry, lost whatever section that was, but the section that outlines the requirements for the accessory dwelling units, it is in fact standalone. We're only showing 2 of a potential 3 dwelling units here in the R3 district. The lot exceeds the minimum. The building exceeds its maximums, but as Zach pointed out, kind of baked into the legislation, as with most conditional uses, Planning Commission has the opportunity to waive or attempt to mitigate that in some other way. I think with regard to Mr. Keebler's question on the rear yard, whether setbacks are a part of this question or not, I think is interesting, because I mean, by definition, this says that it shall be located in the rear yard. Typically, the rear yard requirement is the setback requirement. So, I don't think this has ever specifically been addressed. In general, I think, I attended all the work sessions and offered some opinions along the way when in 2017, when this section was written. And part of the reason that Planning Commission at the time decided that a conditional use was the right path for this rather than Board of Zoning Appeals was that Planning Commission has the ability to look at the bigger picture, to not have the applicant subject to Board of Zoning Appeals decision standards, but have the flexibility that Planning Commission really has in making these determinations. So when this section of the code, or when Planning Commission wrote this section of the code, it was by design that they expected some flexibility and some different opportunities and different solutions to come here that perhaps wouldn't be as simple as does it meet zoning or not meet zoning. So I think with regard to its location in the rear yard and the setbacks, I think certainly side yard setbacks are important, but in this particular case, it says it's supposed to be in the rear yard. So this one certainly is. As we pointed out, it's kind of smaller in every way, but the footprint. And I think that one thing that Zach might have neglected to mention or forgot to mention perhaps is that this is the first time you've seen one of these since this has been, since this code has been written. And, it's the first opportunity to evaluate this project and also to kind of see what happens when we actually look at a project with regard to the fresh and never tested zoning provisions that are sort of baked into this particular thing. So I appreciate your flexibility here as we kind of look at this and work through our first code attempt at this. With regard, while we're on that topic, with regard to the fire chief's comments, I think there's sort of a conflict. I think that when this went through the legislative process, through all the meetings and work sessions and Planning Commission, and ultimately at City Council, I think that, perhaps it should have been looked at, or asked specifically to the fire chief, how do you feel about buildings in the backyards? Because we're about to create something that says, we are encouraging people to do this. So I think, in all fairness, the fire chief's concerns here are maybe not specific to this project necessarily, but specific to the actual legislation that we're trying to make this application under. So that being said, let's look at the next slide. So Zach kind of pointed this out. This is sort of an adaptive reuse plan. Just again, kind of showing our dimensions, where it's located, the existing parking, how that by using this section of the code as an accessory dwelling unit, it's keeping our lot coverage down. It allows us to meet the lot coverage restrictions, provide the parking, and works out, pretty simply in order to do this. And again, as I pointed out, this interior finish that was created has never, in fact, been rented. And it's only since this new code provision has been adopted that we really even have the opportunity to do that. So, and then on to the next slide, please. So all that being said, I think, looking at this thing, if we look at the 2 pictures on the left side, I think in this particular case, I think the fire department has a legitimate concern here. I mean, this thing was designed specifically at the time to have it still look like a garage. At the time in 2001, you weren't allowed to have a separate dwelling unit. We've never been allowed to have two residences or even two buildings on one lot other than accessory buildings. So I'm not really sure how this happened in 2001, but it seems as though the intention was to do this, but not make it look like another dwelling unit. I think that in our current code, and certainly in light of the fire chief's concerned, I think that these should perhaps look like dwelling units or be obviously looking like dwelling units for life safety in particular. So, since receiving the comments, we've just kind of suggested here that perhaps, this kind of incognito apartment hidden behind garage doors that they actually left in place. And what they did was they built full insulated walls behind this. They put real live insulated windows that line up behind the little windows of the garage door. They worked pretty hard to get a little light in that front room and still have it look like a garage. I certainly agree that maybe that's not the greatest solution from a life safety standpoint. So we're just suggesting that perhaps, in light of the fire chief's concerns and that we could in fact maybe put an entrance on it, put a little porch on it, throw some bigger windows in there, essentially eliminate these garage doors. There was a mention in the staff report that, maybe we should tear this thing down and start over, so to speak, in order to meet the design guidelines. That seems rather excessive considering they've been given a certificate of occupancy and this building predates all of us. But I think sort of the main point that the fire chief made is certainly a valuable one, that, this should be easily identifiable. We could do something with signage, address plaques or something, so it's particularly clear, if there were an emergency. But as I said, other than making it look like a residence, I think, perhaps the fire chief's concern is more about this provision of the code than this application in particular. So I just thought I would push this out here. I mean, I'm certainly comfortable with you guys tabling this if this is if we need to submit this in some other fashion or something like that. I am not necessarily sure. I believe that the heavy lifting has been done, so to speak, with a certificate of occupancy being issued, that I don't know that we need to resubmit and reevaluate an approved structure at this point. Any new construction certainly would need to be permitted and submitted as such, but to go back and sort of void that building permit and say we're going to look at this thing like it's brand new is maybe not exactly fair to my clients. So anyway, that being said, last slide, I think. It's the decision standards that we're all familiar with. Certainly we believe that we meet the decision standards here for conditional use. It is allowed in the zoning district. It does meet the intent of the zoning code. It's compatible with the goals of the comprehensive plan. The size and shape of the lot is twice what it needs to be and certainly supports this use. It's not going to be hazardous or disturbing. As Zach pointed out, this is actually a 3-family district. This could be a 3-family residence. And instead we're kind of going with 1.5. So we think it's less detrimental or hazardous or disturbing perhaps to the neighbors, keeping in mind that this is the section of the mile square in particular that Planning Commission targeted for additional density and wrote this section that only applies in R3MS. This accessory dwelling unit doesn't exist anywhere else in our code. It's specific to this, which is, effectively designed for areas with adjacency to the university to eliminate car trips and kind of put the density where we want it, so we don't it doesn't start popping up elsewhere. Obviously, the decision standard D, this is an accessory use. There's no accessory to the accessory in this case. It's adequately served by public facilities because they're already in place. So when we talk about the inspections that had to happen for this thing to get constructed in the 2000s, that would have included utility connections and all of those things. Obviously, it does not require any public expenditure. While it may not be designed perhaps with the ideas embedded in the design guidelines for the accessory structure, it is by definition an accessory structure. I mean, the model that we talked about was, carriage houses and units above garages and secondary units and secondary buildings. This predates all of us and our zoning code. This is the neighborhood. This isn't trying to become the neighborhood. It is the neighborhood. So I think to, maybe address the exterior in terms of safety and the way it telegraphs its entrance from the street is important. But, to try to redecorate the secondary building, I think is perhaps a little excessive. Traffic and parking would certainly remain as it is now. It seems adequate for what's there. Doesn't result in a loss of a historic picture, scenic feature, and all permits can be obtained because the permits already have been obtained. So the question at hand is really, from a planning commission standpoint is this what planning commission had in mind? Does it meet the standards for a accessory dwelling unit? And certainly it's our contention that it does. So be happy to answer any questions and appreciate your consideration.
Okay, just to make it clear to everybody what we're doing here is I'm going to entertain any questions for Mr. Webb. We're not entertaining debate over the proposal yet. After we do that, we will then allow for public comment. After we close public hearing, then we will be able to debate it and discuss it. So are there questions for Mr. Webb? Yes, Mr. Keebler.
I guess the question I have here, we keep going back to certificate of occupancy. The garage has to have a certificate of occupancy, I believe. The permit said that it was not to be used as a dwelling unit. Is that correct, Zachary? And Scott keeps saying that a certificate of occupancy was issued. I assume it was never issued as a dwelling unit. Is that correct?
That's correct. The certificate of occupancy is just a general term that we apply to a lot of different kinds of projects. And
Anything.
the exact title is certificate of occupancy and use. And for the exact CO for this garage structure that was issued in 2003, there is a note on it, and this is the exact note that it says building cannot be used as a dwelling unit.
Okay, so that means a dwelling unit means nobody can live there. It's got nothing to do with whether it's a rental unit or not. Nobody can live in it if it says not to be used as a dwelling unit. Is that correct?
This is a question for Zach.
That's what I would take it to mean.
Okay, so it has been used illegally as a dwelling unit since 2003 when the certificate of occupancy was issued. Is that what we're learning here?
Zach, I would refer that to you, and then I'll let Mr. Webb eventually respond to all of that.
If somebody was residing in it since then it would appear that that is contradictory to what the approval was.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Webb, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just want to, try to add as much clarity to this as possible. I mean, to renovate the garage, if you're not going to build anything in it, I mean, you don't need a building permit and you don't need a certificate of occupancy to hang by wall or put lights in your garage. A certificate of occupancy would not have been issued for that. Utilities would not have been connected to this. So while, we're all trying to interpret what the one line that records did preserve, is that it's not supposed to be a dwelling unit. Our interpretation, the owner's interpretation, has been that was a zoning issue, that they have always been allowed to use it. This, as I pointed out, Mr. Keebler, this was not a bait and switch. This was not, they had a permit to renovate a garage and leave it a garage. They had a permit to build what they built, and that got inspected and a certificate of occupancy was issued. They didn't get a certificate of occupancy for an empty garage, and then after the C of O was issued, went and built an apartment in there. That simply didn't happen.
Did they own it back then?
They
Did
did,
they get the permit?
yes.
Okay.
All right. If there are no other questions for Mr. Webb, I would ask whether there's Sam, are there any members of the public who would like to address this issue?
There are none. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
I so move.
It's moved by Mr. Dana, seconded by someone, yes, by Ms. Blackmar. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Raise your hand, actually. Okay, thank you. So we're back into our regular session. So what we will do here is I will allow discussion first. When that is taken care of, we will then move to talk about the decision standards, and then I will entertain a motion. The motion could be to approve it, to deny it, or to table it. So that's our roadmap. So at this point, I'm opening it up to discussion among the members of the commission.
I think this is addressed actually by Mr. Webb, but I would appreciate his doing it again so that it can sink into me. And it has to do with the whole issue of whether this has been used as a dwelling unit. This appears to me, as I hear the conversation between Mr. Webb and Mr. Keebler, a very fundamental issue. And I'm just trying to explore more exactly where that lands us with the proposal before us. The fact that it says it's not to be used as a dwelling unit. Again, I repeat, I think this has been addressed. Please do it again.
Well, may I my observation here is that I think we know that a certificate of occupancy was issued. A comment was made about the occupancy. Now, whether or not it was occupied between then and now is pretty much irrelevant to our decisions, in my opinion. But I will allow the question if Mr. Webb would like to answer it.
So because of our, lack of record keeping, or our, lack of necessity of record keeping, we really don't have anything in the record other than the certificate of occupancy was issued. My point is that the certificate of occupancy was issued for what was built. I don't believe that the inspectors would have granted a certificate of occupancy, finalized out the inspections and everything else if it weren't a dwelling unit that they were building there. It was the owner's understanding as the applicant at the time that they could do this, but they could never rent it. It could never be part of their housing stock, but they could use it for their personal use. And that is why that note was attached to that. I don't think that note says enough. I don't think it's filling in the record for us. I'm just basing this on the fact that, this isn't ancient history. This is, 2001. I was in practice in 2001. The city has been doing quality inspections, has been working with NIC since 2001. I have a hard time believing that any of this was done under the radar. I think what we're suffering from here is a lack of a record, not that my clients or anyone else did some kind of bait and switch and built something that they were not allowed to build. They were allowed to build it. The lack of record has us in a position saying, well, you can build it, we'll inspect it, we'll grant a certificate of occupancy, but you can't rent it. And as I said, they have paid water bills on it, they've paid utility bills on it. I mean, it has been in its current configuration since that building permit was issued.
Thank you. Ms. Rosenberg.
So a plausible scenario I have that concerns me, I'm back to whether the building is safe as a dwelling unit, and I'll explain. I have been in shops with bedrooms, a shower unit, a kitchen. That doesn't mean that people live there. This could be a building on a piece of property, which certainly has walls, certainly has plumbing, certainly has electric. I just don't personally know if it is up to code for safety for people to actually live in it. I could see a scenario where the owners felt that they could stay in the building because they were told, sure, go ahead. This just isn't legal for anyone else. So that's just a plausible scenario. All I care about right now is whether the building is safe right now as part of my decision-making process.
I
Like,
think you can add that as a
Okay.
condition.
Well,
okay,
if I
and
could-
I just want to make known before any debate, I think this is wonderful code. I would love to see accessory dwelling units be used behind in the rear yard of buildings. This was done on purpose. That's what planning commission is for, is to make plans. And so I think it's delightful. You mentioned a carriage house. Been in them in urban environments, love them. So I just want to say that the whole idea of this, 2017 legislative action, it's amazing. So no matter what my decision is, I just want to say that I'm really supportive of the concept.
If I could address the safety question.
You're not
Um,
recognized, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the commission at this point unless somebody asks you a question. Mr. Keebler?
I'm not sure I agree that I really like this, but it's our code. And so I think the question is, does it meet the requirements of conditional use? And it looks to me like it could. I think though that it's obvious it was never intended to be a dwelling unit. And our new code gave you the idea, okay, carriage house, design requirements, etc. And since we're starting over here, I don't think they should have to tear it down. But at the same time, I don't think there would be anything wrong with saying, if we're going to do this, and if we're going to approve it, it should meet the design standards of the area. It should meet the existing building codes. And nothing grandfathered, because it was not permitted to be a dwelling unit. And so they need to dress it up, make it look like a nice dwelling unit that meets the design criteria of the district in the mile square. And those ought to be at a minimum if it's a condition. Now, I understand Chief Deathridge's concern when it looks like a garage, because like Zach said, you pull up to a garage and you're not as intent on you're not as intent on risking lives of firefighters for a garage the same as you would a dwelling. Now, I responded to fires in this town and EMS runs for 34 years. So I do have some experience. And as long as the accessory building behind a building, the post office will give it a 1/2 designation, it's pretty clear that it's in the rear. Okay, or it's above, but nevertheless, if they'll give it a 1/2, I don't see the problem of accessory dwelling on the same lot, particularly when that should have been argued back when the code was approved. I don't think we have the ability to deny this under our current code. But I think we can sure put the conditional uses, or the conditions rather, that it meets the existing building code, no grandfathering, and that it's redesigned to match the design guidelines of the mile square.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Bracken.
Yeah, I was wondering if potential illegal use is relevant at all. Would it be reasonable, and I'm not saying this occurred, but if there was intentional illegal use, to say that we require that all fines that were applicable be paid for illegal use before granting permission to move forward? Because I agree both with Richard and Shauna on this, but that to me remains an issue potentially.
Now I'm going to look at the law director.
In my opinion, the answer would be no, in part, based upon what I've heard, and I'm not the person who would investigate this, but that there would have to have been some level of proof that there was someone habitating or living in that structure. And there seems to be some point of dispute on that issue. So I am not the judge in this situation, but there's got to be some level of proof that there was in fact a violation. And then we've got another dynamic too, which is this is not an ex post facto situation because the law hasn't changed to create a violation, but we have the opposite. The law has been changed to allow such a use. So my suggestion or recommendation on that would be is that you have an application right now. The application is dealing with a current use that would be allowed with as a conditional use. And that's really kind of how you have to look at it. I think that the points that have been raised is what are the design standards? What are the building codes? Those are all seem to be legitimate questions that planning should ask. I presume that there will be inspections done and there are code requirements that need to be met. But again, those aren't for me to decide. I don't know if Jason, if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, well, outside this specific instance, if we take away this particular scenario, would it be reasonable to say, yeah, we would grant conditional use, but also you have to pay these relevant fines because you had been using a place inappropriately?
I'll give you my lawyer answer when the lawyer isn't sure. You got to take it on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
You know, I don't know the answer. You know, I think that if there were a situation where there was a what I might describe in a hypothetical as a flagrant violation of law, and I certainly think that the commissions, the BZA and the planning commissions, and perhaps even Mr. Webb have seen those situations exist in certain communities. I'm not hearing that existing here. So again, my lawyer answers it depends on a case by case, and if it exists here, that's really not one of the design factors that comes into play. Although you know, you get to M, all necessary permits and licenses, and you know that's perspective looking, which is really what we're talking about here.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bracken.
Could I ask an additional question of Scott, though? I just wanted to know, when was the original garage itself built? Do we know that?
You're muted, Scott.
Told me I couldn't talk. I honestly don't know. I mean, it was certainly not built by the owners. I mean, this is the only garage that we know was ever part of this house. There was never an attached garage to it. You know, houses of this era, it's really common to find these, you know, accessory structures and garages in the backyard. So, I mean, guessing by the construction type and what was evidence there, I'd say, guess 30s to the 50s, somewhere in there probably, that it was built.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Chris.
Can I ask another question, please?
Mr. Dana.
Yes. What gives me hope about this project is what Mr. Keebler pointed out, which has to do with the design guidelines. And I just see those as the avenue that can speak effectively to whether this project can meet the needs of the fire chief. It seems to me he would be intimately involved in those design standards and putting his imprimatur upon it, saying in effect, I think this is what would, if not guarantee, strongly bring about the possibility of safety. That just gives me, it gives me hope that something can work. And I agree totally, of course. The code is the code, and we have to respond to that and work our way in our decisions around that reality. That's all.
Right, thank you. if commissioners deem that the design that Mr. Webb provided of the new facade and new entrance is important, then you should make that one of the conditions when and if you make such a motion at the end of this process. Likewise, for code enforcement, that would be something that you would want to add as a condition. Yes, Mr. Keebler.
No, I really think it needs to go back for some more design if that's going to be a condition, because simply adding a little porch on the front and filling in the garage doors doesn't look to me like it meets the design standards. Now, I don't know all the detail. I think that's for Zach and Sam to take a look at and come back to us at a later date and tell us. But I think it needs to be a condition, but we need somebody who knows what those standards are and things. And it's not just adding a little portico on the front.
Okay.
It still looks like a garage to me with that on it.
Okay, well, that's the commission's discretion right there. So again, your options coming up will be either to make a motion to approve it with conditions, to disapprove it, or to table it with the request for more information. If you move to table, move to table is not debatable. So just letting you know Robert's rules, because I know Robert. Yes, Richard.
Before we table, I think it would be a good idea if we could give a flavor to Mr. Webb as to what would give us what conditions that we would see, or what things we want to see for them to come back. To just simply table at this point, I don't think is fair to the applicant. I really think we need to
Yes, I think discussion before that would be very helpful to the applicant.
I mean, before we table, I mean, to me, the conditions,
That's only one of three options.
yeah, would the conditions to me would be to meet the existing building code for a dwelling unit with no grandfathering, and to redesign to meet the design standards of the mile square and the zone.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Yes, Mrs. Rosenberg. You're muted.
And I was about to say something exciting. I actually moved to approve, but I will need help with the conditions. I definitely would like it to fit with the design standards for this district. And I would like it to be up to code based on an inspection, like a full inspection, like with a rental unit. So I don't know what the official way to put that is, but those are the two things I personally would put on there. So
Okay. Mr. Bracken?
Yeah, I would agree with that. As long as our chief's okay with it and it's up to code. Yeah, I would like to approve this, and I agree with Shauna, who previously said that this type of use is beneficial. I agree and would love to see more of it, as long as it's safe.
Okay. Before we gain a second on that, I'd like us to go through the decision standards, if that's okay.
We should.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to read the decision standards, and since I'm abstaining from the discussion, I rely on you to speak up and either a yay, nay, or explanation that you'd like to provide. Decision standard A, the proposed use is in fact a conditional use appropriate in the zoning district in which it has been proposed.
Yes.
Yes.
The use and site will satisfy the general intent of the zoning code.
Yes. 'Yes.
The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that staff brought up was the 3 stories. The issue that the
Square footage.
area, square footage. Item C, the use and site will be compatible with the general intent of the comprehensive plan. Okay. Item D, the size and shape of the site are sufficient for the proposed use.
Yes,
Okay. The use will not be hazardous or disturbing to existing or potential future neighboring uses that are permitted in the zoning district. Okay. The use will, this is F, the use will not involve activities, processes, materials, equipment, or conditions of operation that will be detrimental to any person, property, et cetera, which is really for commercial or industrial uses.
yes,
G, the only accessory uses will be directly related to the operation of the principal use and will not be operated independent of the principal use.
yes, I think the explanation here is good, the implied notion. So I vote yes.
Okay. H, the use and site will be adequately served by public facilities and services such as streets, water and sewer, drainage structures, police and fire protection, and refuse disposal, or adequate provisions will be made to provide the same services privately. And so I think you should consider the conditions that Shauna had on her motion when responding to that.
Yes.
I, development of the site and operation of the use will not require substantial public expenditure for additional infrastructure or service.
Yes,
Okay. And the site, J, the site will be designed, constructed, and maintained in a character harmonious in appearance and general character with the existing or intended character of the general vicinity, and that such use will not change the essential character of the same area. Structures to be constructed, reconstructed, or altered in a residential zoning district shall have the appearance of residential buildings permitted in the zoning district.
but it all hinges on what,
That's up in the air.
That kind of depends on the condition that you put on it.
right,
Okay, item K, the site is designed so that on-site traffic and traffic accessing the site will not inappropriately impact the movement of traffic on adjacent public streets.
agreed.
L, proposed construction will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of natural, scenic, or historic features of major importance.
Yes,
Okay. M, all necessary permits and licenses for the conditional use and its operation have been or can be obtained for the use at the proposed location.
yes,
Okay. So at this point, then I would recognize Shauna's motion, but we will need a second. I have a second from Mr. Keebler.
No,
No, okay. Well, let me first see if I get a second and then we can have discussion. Second from Ms. Blackmar. Now discussion, Mr. Keebler.
I really don't like the idea of passing this on with such an open-ended thing about the design. I really think it should come back to Planning Commission with the design with elevations and a comparison to the design standards with a recommendation by staff before this is passed on. That just takes one meeting. And at that point is when we should be passing this on. And before that, I think it should be tabled as long as we're all in agreement that the primary thing at this point is that the outside appearance to the current design standards for a dwelling unit in this zone is paramount to the approval.
let me please reverse myself and say, having heard you speak, I am with you in those sentiments and details with regard to coming back and taking a thorough look at it. That would be advisable, I think.
Ms. Blackmar, and then I will recognize Mr. Webb.
Well, I don't don't know enough about how the fire department responds to things. So would signage that clearly indicates that it's a dwelling unit, the address in large size with would these things not suffice to meet the health and safety standards? The structure is not particularly visible from the street from a design perspective.
Okay. Mr. Dethridge, did you want to respond to that?
Well, I guess, signage is one way to address it, but I'm not sure, how that would fall into the other codes. Something that's obvious enough to point us back there in the middle of the night when it's dark and raining. I don't know if anybody would want something like that on their property or.
So you'd like a facade to look like a living dwelling?
At least.
Okay.
Something that looks, that doesn't look like a garage.
Yep. Mr. Webb, did you want to respond to that?
Yes, if I may. So certainly the life safety question, and I certainly did not mean to be cavalier about that. I can say from experience that the residential building code, as far as life safety and egress windows, requirements for bedrooms, all of those things haven't changed. I mean, would be more than happy, both through a construction inspection, if it appears construction is going to be required, and then certainly from the rental inspection to verify that. So we certainly have no problem with that. There's no question about the safety, no question from my standpoint that safety is paramount in this discussion, absolutely. With regard to Mr. Keebler's point, I would just respectfully say that Planning Commission wrote design guidelines for the entire mile square, and they wrote design guidelines, additional ones for these accessory structures. No other construction that happens in these districts under these guidelines has to come back to Planning Commission for approval. I think you've done your heavy lifting. I think you wrote your restrictions and your design guidelines clear enough that staff will be able to evaluate whether we meet them without returning back to Planning Commission as a design review board.
Thank you. I see some nods from staff. So that go ahead, Sam.
Thank you, Mr. Snavely. I did take the liberty to write up some potential conditions if the majority of commission feels.
I think the commission would love to hear them.
So I think Zach might be able to get them on the screen. So the reason I wrote these the way I did is, not having the building official here in the meeting, we're not sure whether it would even be necessary to do a full building permit. So what I would like to recommend it if the commission wanted to do this would be to have the highest level building official, the building official actually go into the building if this did move forward, and also the highest level property maintenance code supervisor as well. And to kind of follow on with what Scott was saying about the mile square, we would have the ability to make those determinations without coming back to Planning Commission. And I think Chief Dethridge is absolutely correct as far as there isn't a code that would specify, an address that you could see from the roadway. But I think we can work together to come up with some identification. And to Mr. Bracken's comments about fines, I just kind of put a general catch-all phrase. If we do an investigation and find there are some outstanding code violations and there were fines that weren't paid, I don't think there were, we don't have any on record, then that would kind of cover that and just put it in the administrative staff due diligence. So that's all that I could capture from the discussion if you felt inclined to move forward with it.
Can I just ask for the sake of enlightenment, Mr. Perry? Therefore, the first bullet point designed to address miles or guidelines is determined by CDD staff. That is harmonious with Mr. Webb's comment that the guidelines are there. They were drawn up, not necessary to have the Planning Commission do a review. I mean, is that what that first bullet point points to?
Correct. Yeah. I don't think you want to take up another meeting for something, a project this small. But if you do, you can, and we can go through, how we interpret the mile square guidelines. We can do that in a meeting if you like.
Okay, since the motion was made by Ms. Rosenberg, do you accept these conditions? as
Yeah,
part
I
of-
really appreciate them because I'm not the best at writing conditions. So this covers everything that was important to me. So
Okay, and the seconder was Ms. Blackmar. Are they acceptable to you as well? Okay, so there's a motion on the table, Mr. Keebler.
The only other question I had was whether it should say something about meeting, if this certificate of occupancy was issued in 2005 and it was not to be used as a dwelling unit, my only question is whether it should say something about that the building be brought up to the existing code for a single family dwelling.
That is a great, if it's okay, if I can respond to that.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I like the spirit of that. My concern kind of goes back to Mr. Webb's is when a building is completed, and as I'm sure all of you can understand, if there are no plans, then what sometimes can happen is a building has to be dismantled partially in order for an inspector to see how it was built, unless a professional engineer certifies that it was built according to certain standards. And so what I think might happen here is if we have a requirement like Mr. Keebler is suggesting, is it might end up to where the project doesn't move forward because they don't want to do a partial demolition to reveal how it was constructed. That's been my experience on what's happened in the past for those kind of requirements. You can try that and you can recommend approval with it that way. And that would give some time for Mr. Webb to look into that and see if that's possible before it moved on to council. I just want to caution you with the potential risk there that it may not work out.
It just really concerns me that you issued a permit and an occupancy permit that says it was not to be used as a dwelling unit. I don't know whether it's approved as a shop or a fancy garage or what it was approved at. And now we're trying to make it an official dwelling unit. And yet we don't know what the occupancy permit was issued under, what it was for.
And what I would like to do is put the ball in the court of the building official to sort that out, rather than mandating that it comply with current building code, because they've got the working knowledge of changes that might need to be made.
How about if
And you have that in the third condition, I believe.
inspected by building official for compliance with
Current code.
building or with building code for single family dwellings.
I don't personally support that, but if that's what you would like to do as a commission, we will do our best to make it happen.
Mr. Webb? You're muted.
I think we're kind of getting in the weeds here a little bit. I mean, I think, I appreciate Sam's point. I mean, we don't want to sort of try to recreate this construction and go back to rough inspections. And let's go back to looking at the wires in the wall necessarily. I think to Sam's point, that's not necessary. That being said, I think to Mr. Keebler's point, though, I mean, minimum room sizes, door swings, egress windows, smoke detectors, all of that stuff absolutely should be up to current code.
I agree.
And I think the building inspector, that's what the building inspector would be looking for. And Sam is indicating agreement with that. Is there further discussion on the motion as amended through the conditions articulated by Mr. Perry? Are you ready to vote? Okay, would you call the roll, please, Sam?
Be glad to. And I'll start with Ms. Rosenberg,
yes.
and Ms. Blackmar,
Yes.
Mr. Dana,
Yes,
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Keebler,
Yes.
Mr. Snavely.
I abstain. I recuse myself, excuse me. Okay, the motion is passed 701. Therefore, it will move on to City Council for approval. And hearing no other business before us, I would entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I so move.
I think it was 501, Bill, not.
That's what I said. I said 501. I meant to say that. 501. Is there a second to the motion to adjourn? There is from Ms. Blackmar. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone's.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Zach.